And Musk's comments follow a report earlier this week that Goldman Sachs is considering moving its asset management base from New York to Florida. Joining us now with more on this, Mick Mulvaney, former White House Chief of Staff, and New York Congressman Tom Suozzi is back with us. And Mick, I know that you're ready to go, and I know, Congressman, you remember a lot of the points that you made yesterday. I guess, you know, in this day and age, Mick, you said something sounds a little Stalinist. Well, you know, that term and fascist and all that stuff has become so cheap that I don't even know if it's bad anymore to be a Stalinist, really. It's thrown around so much by certain elements. But what particular part of what Congressman Suozzi said yesterday did you refer to as Stalinist?
Yeah, that was the keeping of the lists, which really surprised me and disappointed me that it seems like so often now we're keeping lists. There's lists, for example, at my alma mater now wants to keep a list of Trump people to exclude us from campus. Tom talked yesterday, I think, 4 or 5 times in his interview about publishing a list of people who didn't support reinstating the SALT deduction. That's what really got me fired up about the list part, but really the substance of the matter was about the SALT deduction itself, because I read the same Bloomberg piece that y'all talked about yesterday, and it did not reference the SALT at all. It referenced the high tax environment in New York. It referenced the crime. It referenced the poor way they've handled COVID. That's the reason that folks are leaving New York City or want to leave New York State, not because of something the Trump administration did in the tax plan in 2017.
I mean, one thing that I can tell you for a fact, and Tom, and we didn't get to talk enough about it yesterday, I don't think, is who the SALT tax, if that were deductible again, who that would help. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. As a Democrat, you apparently really like wealthy people, because that's who it helps. If they're the ones that, I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars for anyone that makes money with these SALT deductions. So is that where you want to really park your car right now, in the wealthy person space, helping them as a Democrat?
Well, let me first say that I like wealthy people, I like low-income people, I like middle-class people, I like all people. I want to help people. I want to try to make the world a better place to live in. That's why I'm in public service. But the bottom line is I want a list of those elected officials that are not supporting the reinstatement of the SALT cap because it's killing my state. And I don't want those elected officials coming to my state, coming to the city of New York to collect campaign contributions. And I'm going to keep a list of those elected officials and a list of the people that give them those campaign contributions so that the public and those people can be made aware that you're subsidizing our own demise. We need the state and local tax deduction. It's been there for over 100 years. They got rid of it in 2017, and it's chasing people out of our state. I've heard people like Mick and others boast about the fact that people are leaving New York State to go to their states, and it's leaving behind the low and moderate income people to hold the bags. They've got to pick up all those expenses that were previously covered by those wealthy people that are leaving the state.
What about that, Mick?
I shocked.
Oh, it looks like Mick is. It looks like Mick. Yeah. That's
yeah.
I mean, that was so
shocking.
Compelling, Tom. That I mean, all of us are just like.
Over. All done.
Mick, you were from. Is Mick back? Is Mick?
Bottom line is Nick.
God, you're good. No what? No what? Hold on a second. Let me see if we got him back. Wow. I mean, does that happen on the floor when you say something? All of your opponents just go, "Holy cow! I'm with Tom now." Is he back? Is Mick back or not, Greco?
Mick is.
You lost him. Really?
Mick's the former chief of staff to the President of the United States of America, but he was also a former congressman from South Carolina. And every year, New York, for every dollar it sends to the Washington, D.C., we get back 79 cents. For every dollar that South Carolina residents send to Washington, D.C., they get back $1.35. New York is subsidizing South Carolina. We're happy to do it. They've got a lot of more problems. They have a higher poverty rate. They have more uninsured people. They have a higher homicide rate. They've got all kinds of issues. But we're subsidizing them,
Tom,
and people are leaving our state.
I know. I've heard that. He's back. He's back. He's brave enough to come back. So now he's back. Mick, just in summary, you can imagine what he's saying. He's saying that you know, New York just pays for the rest of the country, and they have Central Park, and, you know, I mean, it's just so great, everything that goes on here. And they subsidize everybody else.
The meeting was ended by the host, which is by you folks, or maybe by Tom, not by me. But anyway, look, go back to the thing about making it live.
Stalinist did it.
Go ahead, Nick.
Okay. Is that where's the list of folks who passed the laws in the first place that made the taxes so high? Where's the list of folks who passed the laws on how to handle COVID so poorly? Where's the list of folks who passed laws that made it unsafe to go into New York City? But let's talk about this whole idea of donor states versus recipient states, which I know Tom talked about yesterday. Keep in mind one thing. States don't pay taxes. People pay taxes. The reason that on average New Yorkers pay more than they do in my state in South Carolina is that they make more. That's the system that Tom likes. That's the system that Tom wants to encourage, that rich people should pay more. In fact, he had a bill, I think, in fact, I know it passed out of the House last year, that got rid of the SALT, reinstated the SALT deduction for 2 years, but raised the income tax rate forever. So, I mean, I hear the rhetoric, and I know it's hard for New York politicians to want to blame themselves. They want to blame somebody else for the difficulties that New York is having. But to blame the federal government and the SALT changes that we put in 2017 for the challenges that state is facing is simply, it's not accurate. And that's why I wanted to have a chat with Tom today on your show.
So let me make it clear that New York State, let me make it clear that New York State's doing a great job compared to a lot of places in this country dealing with the coronavirus. A lot of people died early on. It was a new phenomenon in the United States, and we really faced some real tragedy in our state, and that's why we need a COVID relief package for the entire country right now, including state and local aid for places that have been decimated by loss of revenues. The reality is that the state of New York needs to be more competitive. There's no question about that. But the elimination of the SALT deduction has been a real punch in the gut. And yes, I did propose that we raise the top income tax rate for the wealthiest Americans who make over $400,000 a year back to what it was before President Trump and you came into office. It was 39.6. For some inexplicable reason, you lowered the rate of taxes on the wealthiest people in the United States of America from 39.6 to 37. So I think that we need to have the SALT deduction reinstated, and we should also raise the income tax rate for the highest earners in America back to 39.6.
One of the reasons that we got rid of SALT, and it was a philosophical issue, was that it's a subsidy, it's an incentive for state and local governments to raise taxes. When we want people to save money for retirement, we allow them to take a deduction for their contributions to the IRA. When we want them to pay more for their own health care, we give them a tax deduction for contributions to the health savings account. The state and local tax deduction was simply an incentive to pay more taxes. When you subsidize something, you get more of it. And many of states, such as yours, your county, took advantage of that to raise taxes and were able to go to the taxpayers and say, well, don't worry, because you're not going to pay all of this because you get to get a deduction on your federal tax return. That's not fair to the lower tax states. What we tried to do was level the playing field with a flat deduction that would be the same from state to state, so that there was some accountability to local and state leaders who were raising taxes.
Mick, we have a very astute viewer who wrote something, and I want to ask you about it. If a U.S. citizen pays income tax today to a foreign state, to a foreign country, they get an uncapped foreign tax credit. This is not, by the way, merely a deduction against their U.S. tax liability, their federal tax bill. However, if they pay income tax to a domestic state, right, like New York, they get capped. Does that make any sense to you in the world?
Andrew, in fairness, I'm not familiar with the first one. I know there were some tax incentives to encourage Americans to go overseas to work, because when Americans work overseas, they tend to want to do business with American companies, so it helps our exports. But I'm not familiar with the details of that specific tax credit that you're talking about. But come back to your point about the... Go ahead.
Andrew, I am familiar with this tax credit, and it's the same thing that right now businesses can deduct their taxes that they pay to state and local governments, but they made it so that individuals couldn't deduct their full deduction. It's simply unfair. It's unfair that people are being taxed on taxes they pay. That doesn't make sense. It's not fair that this deduction has been in place since 1913. It was the first deduction put in place when the progressive income tax code was put in place. It was the very first. Why? Because we wanted to protect states' rights. We wanted to be able to protect states' ability to do what they want. And the people who will hold them accountable are the people who live in those states. And they will hold them accountable. I campaigned on getting a property tax cap in my state because I thought the property taxes were increasing too much, especially for the schools. So we'll hold our own people accountable in our state. Right now, New York is subsidizing every other state in the country.
The only thing I'll add to this is that, you know, when you're talking about one country versus another countries, you're talking about federal taxes. And I don't think you can compare federal taxes to federal versus state and local taxes. I mean, they're different jurisdictions and different ways to do it. If you're paying taxes in another country, it's because you're living in a different country. So it would be hard to double charge you from one federal level to another. It's a complicated question, though, Mick, and it is a situation where these states are pushing back. It's something that Biden doesn't have in his platform right now. But if the Democrats do pick up with this and run with this next year, do you think it is something that will actually pass the Congress?
Well, I think it depends a lot on the outcome of the Georgia state Senate races. If the Democrats control both the House and the Senate and the White House, then I think that's the least of the things you'll see changing over the course of the next 2 years. So if the Republicans could keep those 2 seats in Georgia, which I expect they would, Georgia's of sort of a reddish gray of shade of purple, and win both of those seats, then no, you're not going to see any dramatic changes here, nor should you. The philosophy of it, Becky, was correct. We're trying to level the playing field so that, I mean, right now, face it, if you live in Florida, you're actually paying income tax on more of your income, federal income tax on more of your income than someone from New York, because someone from New York gets a larger deduction, or they did before the state and local tax deduction changes. They could deduct more of that from their federal income tax. So if you lived in Florida, more of your income was available to be taxed by the federal government. And keep in mind, one of the things that gets lost.
No, I was just going back to a previous point. Sorry to cut you off, Mick, but I mean, Tom, let me see how you said it. It's inexplicable that Trump and Mulvaney lowered taxes on these fat cats. These guys making over, these people making over $400,000 a year. All right. That's my word. All right, but it goes from 39.6 to 37. You want to go back from 37 to 30. Do you know what the SALT tax does for wealthy people? 2.6% is peanuts compared to the break you're giving wealthy people by putting the SALT tax back. So you feel horrible about this 2.6% on 400,000 people that make above that. Well, you're giving wealthy people a much bigger tax break by bringing back SALT. Much bigger.
I'm talking facts. People are moving out of my state because of the fact that they've lost their SALT deduction. It is hurting my state.
Taxes are so high.
Mick said earlier, this is a philosophical decision. This was a target of blue states in the United States of America to try and help other states, to try and push people out of our states, because they didn't want the progressive policies where more people are insured, the poverty rate is lower, the minimum wage is higher, where people have a better quality of life. They want to push people out of our states into other states, and it's hurting us as a result. We're losing political power as a result. We've gone from 45 people when I was born in 1962 to 27 members of Congress from New York State, and it's going to go down again. So we've got to make our states more competitive, but we need the SALT deduction back.
You're making my point for you. The SALT deduction came into effect in 2017. You've been losing members of Congress since 1950. Your state's population is roughly flat since 1970. Jamie Dimon was talking about moving his operation out of Florida in 2013, moving out of New York to Florida in 2013. The Bloomberg article that you cited yesterday doesn't even mention SALT. This is not a SALT problem. This is a structural problem in New York. Go read the article again. It talks about things like crime with your friend in New York, Bill de Blasio. Basically, the way you all have handled COVID.
The homicide rate in New York State is lower than the homicide rate in South Carolina.
Okay, great.
Mick, I'm not going to disagree with you about the things that need to happen in New York. The question I'm going to ask you, I'm going to ask you 2 things. One is, do you think it's fair that New York subsidizes a large part of this country? There is by the way, talk about socialism in America. The entire setup of the country is a socialistic program insofar as there are givers and takers, and right now there are takers all over the country in states like yours, frankly. So let's just accept what it is. But the question is, don't you think that that changing the SALT tax was meant specifically, you said philosophically, but specifically to disadvantage states like New York and try to advantage others? I mean, I don't understand how you could see it, frankly, any other way. That's what's happening. It was a political effort.
Andrew, I disagree. First of all, it was a way to raise money because, to Joe's point, by doing what we did, the wealthiest people actually paid more in income taxes. You can go, it's fun, go look at Senator Kamala Harris's tax returns from 2016 and 17. She had to file those as part of her campaign for president. And you could see that the percentage of her income that was available to tax went up. Her whole taxes went up, but her income went up. But the percentage of her taxes that were able to be taxed by the federal government went up. And she's a high in the top 1% of earners. But your point, I disagree, Andrew, with one of your premises, which is that New York is subsidizing the rest of the country. The New York State doesn't pay $1 worth of tax. It's the wealthy people who live there, and that's the system that my Democrat friends want to not only continue, but to expand. They want to raise taxes on the wealthy. If you do what Tom says, then the folks in New York, the wealthy folks who stay in New York, will end up paying more into the system and end up subsidizing more folks around the country. So, no, what we try to do is simply say, look, let's take the incentive away for state and localities to raise their taxes. Let's stop subsidizing us. Let's stop giving them a federal tax break when they raise their state and local taxes. That's what this is about, and that's why we set it at a flat fee. So, no, I disagree with some of the premises, but...
Let me just say one thing, if I may.
We're going to take this. No, we got to go. We got to take this on the road. We're going to take this on the road. We'll have you both back. Can we do that again? Because I'm going to say we're going to go. We'll be right back. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Mick Mulvaney. We'll be right back.